Here's a story that Vice President Mike Pence wanted to tell this weekend. He flew 1,800 miles to Indianapolis with no political agenda. All he wanted was to watch his hometown Colts play some football, honor Peyton Manning. When more than 20 members of the 49ers took a knee during the national anthem, well, it was just too much for Mike Pence. He could stand silent no longer, so he left before kickoff. Pence tweeting, "I left today's Colts game because at POTUS and I will not dignify any event that disrespects our soldiers, our flag, or our national anthem." Okay, so that story, well, it stinks. And not just because Pence completely misrepresented why the players were kneeling. Just 24 minutes after kickoff, Pence tweeted out a fancy graphic explaining his decision. Note the bolding and the social media links. Wow, I have that made up pretty quickly for someone who had just spontaneously decided to leave. Also, it turns out the reporters, and I love this detail, following Pence had been told to stay in their van because, quote, there may be an early departure from the game. You think? A senior Pence official admitted the vice president and the president had discussed an early departure if the 49ers players didn't stand for the anthem. And Trump himself corroborated it, tweeting, quote, "I asked at VP Pence to leave stadium if any players kneeled, disrespecting our country." The thing is, there was almost no question the 49ers would kneel. They've been doing so in nearly every single game dating back to when then 49er Colin Kaepernick kicked off the movement in 2016.
He knew that we were probably going to do it again. And so this is what systemic oppression looks like. A man with power comes to the game, tweets a couple things out, and leaves the game with an attempt to thwart our efforts.
Don't forget that Vice President Pence flew back and forth from the West Coast for his little performance, his travel prompting a pointed question from Democrat Adam Schiff. After all the scandals involving unnecessarily expensive travel by cabinet secretaries, how much taxpayer money was wasted on this stunt? Joining me now, MSNBC political contributor Jason Johnson, politics editor of The Root, and Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation. Dave, what struck me most here was sort of the desperation, the amount of contrivance to yank this back. You know, there's this feeling when they were having this fight with the football players saying, well, the president's talking about football players while Puerto Rico's getting hit by a hurricane. There's other things to focus on. But they're saying, like, no, let's get back to talking about football. We want to talk about football.
Yeah, I haven't seen choreography this bad since Elaine Bennis on Seinfeld. Chris, this was Gulf of Tonkin for idiots. The speed with which this unraveled was so amazing and shocking, like seeing it unravel in real time. And it has to be said that not only is Mike Pence getting hammered by Democratic politicians or shows like this one, the local Indiana newspapers have hammered him today. Remember, this is Pence's hometown. And they've done so, remember, because this was supposed to be Peyton Manning's day. The ostensible reason why Pence was there was because there was this great unveiling of a Peyton Manning statue, and they feel like Pence overshadowed it with, as one reporter put it, a cheap political stunt. And, you know, this is like Joe Scarborough said this on your network. He described it as worse than Bridgegate. And I think that's a very defensible position, because think about, like, at least with Chris Christie, it was about Jersey revenge. Think about the high-minded purpose at work here. It was to chill the First Amendment rights of people who want to talk about a subject that this administration will not talk about, which is racism and police brutality in this country. It's just more division that's stoked by an administration that all it has left is a dwindling base.
You know, it's also, Jason, David's point about this, it's also like I saw conservatives reacting to it, and I thought this was fascinating. You know, there's this idea that's sort of eye-rolling, right, when, like, people on the left want to make a protest, take a moment that, you know, and turn it into a political moment. And I saw conservatives eye-rolling about the vice president being like, dude, I'm just trying to watch some football here. Like, they felt that way, that this was like an incursion of, like, why are you bringing this up now?
Chris, I completely agree. I've been saying this all along. Nobody likes the fact that the President of the United States has turned America's pastime into a political litmus test. Everybody can watch football, whether you support it or you don't support it. And it's not helped by the fact that, look, Donald Trump does fake racist outrage well. Mike Pence does not. Mike Pence is not sincere. Like, he's like a pastor showing up at a strip club saying, I can't believe that they're stripping here. I'm so offended. I'm going to leave. Like, you knew this was going to happen. So the whole thing just came off as really disingenuous, and it doesn't help him at all. Yeah, and David, I also think there's something interesting happening with this whole issue, which is that they want to talk about it. The president was clearly delighted at himself, right? He found this issue. And I think, again, I do think it's an issue that, abstracting away, they're probably the majority would be on their side, that they're sort of turning around because Trump is such a uniquely polarizing figure in some ways.
Yeah, people have to look at the polls on this issue because the common sense in Trump's campaign was this idea that this is a winning issue for him because he gets to demonize black people who are protesting racism, I guess. And yet when you look at the polling numbers, USA Today did polling on this, other places as well, support is actually moving towards the players. Now, it's not necessarily moving towards the players on the idea that we need to have a national discussion about police violence, but it's moving towards the players on the idea that people should have the right to dissent. And that this is about First Amendment rights and that Trump does not have the right to chill that. And part of that really is the toxicity of this presidency. But it's fascinating when you look at the numbers from a year ago, which USA Today did, about does Colin Kaepernick have the right to kneel versus now after Trump spoke. And it's a pretty dramatic shift in the direction of the players.
Yeah, and this is the weird sort of reverse Midas touch that this president has on a lot of issues. We've seen it, in fact, with the polling on trust in the media as well. The president is very good at galvanizing his hardcore base. The things, though, that do that tend to be alienating to people who are outside that. And so he can go in and take something like kneeling for the national anthem, which, you know, in a general sense, people might view skeptically, or the media, which in a general sense, people might view skeptically. And Jason, by targeting them, he puts people in a position where they have to choose sides. They're like, well, I guess I'm not on Trump's side.
Right, exactly. And most people aren't because, one, they either just want to enjoy the game, or two, they don't think that this is sincere. And again, the larger problem here about both Trump and Pence, who's doing his best Trump impression, is that everybody recognizes that their values and anger seem to be focused in the wrong areas. You literally had neo-Nazis marching again in Charlottesville on Saturday night. They don't want to talk about that. They want to go to a game and waste $250,000 and then come home. It makes no sense.
To the sincerity, you've got now Trump fundraising off Pence's NFL walkout, of course. Then you've got like this is the last little detail about that photo that he tweeted, which was like a tweet of like getting ready for this game. Boy, like it was like taking the sip of water before the spit take, you know, like, oh, well, I'm just gonna enjoy this game. Guess nothing political is gonna happen. Like it was an old photo that they used from 3 years ago that people called out immediately.
It was an old photo that someone also put through some sort of Instagram filter to make it look slightly different. And this was something, once again, the Indianapolis Star was pointing this out on Twitter within minutes that it was an old photo. So once again, the speed with which this unraveled was really shocking. And I think for a lot of folks also, hearing them talk about respect for the flag and respect for the troops, while at the same time, this horrific situation in Niger with troops dying and being killed, and still no mention of it by the president or the vice president. None. That rings, I think, true with people in a very sincere way. They won't talk about this. They won't talk about the real problems faced by military families. And I would argue that someone like Michael Bennett of the Seahawks has spoken to more soldiers over the last 2 months than Donald Trump or Mike Pence.
4 U.S. Service members, special forces, killed in action in Niger, a country in which apparently we have about 800 U.S. service members serving as part of the global, truly global war on terror, in which we have kinetic activity in a dozen countries or more. Jason Johnson and Dave Zirin, thank you both for being with me tonight.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.